Hey everyone, what's up? It's Ventus, and I'm here with another episode of Agent Overview. On this episode, I'll be talking about Prism. So, Prism, like most agents in the game, the on-file version of Prism and the archive version of Prism are pretty similar. In most cases, if an agent is more suited for utility, then, well, they're probably going to be like that for both versions. There's basically no case where, like, one is strictly for offense and one is strictly for utility or any other playstyle. But the thing with Prism is that even though she is a utility agent, regardless of which version you choose, her playstyles are vastly different. And this is mostly because of her archive version. And maybe it's not even just because of Prism having, two different versions. That's because the playstyle is different. It just could be because Prism is a new generation of agent. She was updated in one of the bigger patches that the game had since it was released, the August patch, which introduced a bunch of new programs, a couple new agents, and a lot of balance changes. And we're getting to see a new type of agent. So when I get to Archive Prism, you'll see what I mean. As for Prism in general, well, she's one of the three agents in the game with at least two anarchy. And this means that she's pretty good in the early game. This means that you can steal from guards without having to knock them out, and especially on higher difficulties, this is very useful because you don't want to break out of a stealth playstyle. If you can steal from the guards without knocking them out, you get med gels, charge packs, and of course money without having to alert them, without having to advance the alarm tracker. Both of these things you will be doing on higher difficulties, and breaking out of a stealth playstyle is extremely dangerous. So it's generally not the recommended playstyle, and because she's an anarchy agent, then she's more suited for that playstyle already, just automatically. The thing is, for on-file Prism, let's go for on-file Prism first, the positives kind of just end there. And that's because on-file Prism doesn't really have anything special. Her Augment is the only thing that she really gets. The other one is the Neural Disruptor. The Augment is Refraction Chamber, and all it does is it gives you 1 power whenever a mainframe device is fully hacked, up to a max of 2 power per turn. Now, in the early stages of the game, this is pretty powerful because most firewalls only have most mainframe devices only have like 1 or 2 layers of firewalls, and especially the ones with only 1 layer. You break it, and you get 1 power back. Let's say if you're just starting out and maybe you just like power drip or something, you get 1 power per turn. Lockpick costs 2 power to use. You break 1 firewall, you get 1 power back. You basically have a net gain of, well, it's 0, but you're not spending anything either. You're not spending any power to hack a mainframe device. But the thing is, you're progressing, so obviously that's going to be a positive thing. You can do it for free. And even as the firewall layers increase, when there's like 2 or 3 firewalls, you're still going to get a pretty good refund on the power. Now the problem is, once you reach the later stages of the game, on campaign mode, day 3, day 4, this is when the firewalls start getting pretty big. 3 to 5 layers, you're going to be seeing quite often. In Endless Plus, or Endless in general, you're going to be seeing firewalls that have 5 layers, 6, 7, even 8 layers. And I'm not talking about the barrier guards either. I'm talking about actual mainframe devices like safes and cameras. So when you get to this point, Refraction Chamber becomes pretty irrelevant. The amount you get refunded back is very little, and all this means is that Prism is not very good after the initial stages of the game. The good thing about Prism, the on-file version of Prism, I guess both versions of Prism, is that because she starts with Anarchy, you can kind of ease her into this utility agent who uses things like shock traps and paralyzers. This is a very strong playstyle. You get her to bring up the rear. You get some, I guess, excess power sometimes, just some extra power every couple turns, and you can just let her support you from behind. But that's basically it for Prism. That's all you can really get from on-file Prism. So she is kind of underwhelming in that sense. But the good thing is, and this is something that I think a lot of people probably don't realize, there's actually something very interesting about on-file Prism that most other agents in the game don't have. And that's her augment being 100% useful in every single mission. Let's say you're using Decker. If you're using Decker and you're using his scan function, well, you can't scan unless you're directly next to a mainframe object, and you can't scan unless there's a daemon inside of it. So there are two conditions for this to actually work. For his augment to actually work, you need to do that. Um, Going on Shalem, if you're playing a stealth playstyle, then the armor piercing doesn't really help you, right? If you're not going to fight, if you're not using ranged weapons, so those are the two conditions, this augment does nothing. Um, Again, just in general, there are so many agents in the game who have conditional augments. Central, Monster, everyone basically has conditional augments, but Prism doesn't. The reason's because if you're on a mission and you're going to do the objective for the mission, no matter what, you're going to be hacking firewalls. You're going to be breaking through mainframe devices. So that means that there's a 100% chance, unless you're just blatantly skipping the objective of the mission, for you to use Refraction Chamber. Whether you get like 1 power back or like 10 power back, doesn't really matter. The fact is that you can use it. So if you want to think of a positive to it, then this is the positive. It's the only augment in the game that has no conditions really. You just always have it. It's always going to be used. There is one more thing to talk about with Prism, on-file Prism, and that is synergy. A lot of the programs that you have are really good with Prism. They have a lot of synergy with it. So let's say you're using Seed. Seed is one of my favorite programs. I use it almost every single time. If you use Seed and you reduce the power of the first program you use, then you're basically going to get free hacks. Because nothing really costs that much. Even if you're using Brimstone, Brimstone costs 3 power, but it costs 4 power less for that initial hack. So if you're playing a very slow play style, just slow and steady, and you're getting free hacks in, then you will be able to actually gain power from Refraction Chamber. If you're using something like Parasite or Parasite 2.0, well, the initial cost of Parasite is 0. So if you just maintain that low cost Parasite, either 0 or 1 cost, then you're either going completely even or you're going to have power gain with Refraction Chamber. So if this is your playstyle, then a slow and steady playstyle, then Prism is probably a really cool agent for you. Now, talking about synergy with other agents. Out of all the agents that I've tried out, I think Prism has the best synergy with archive banks. And the reason for this is because in the early stages of the game, that's when you really don't have anything, and having money is a really nice thing. Having money will let you get items earlier, will help you upgrade your agents a lot sooner than normal, so that's where archive banks comes into play. In lower difficulties of the game, you start each mission with 10 power. On higher difficulties, you start with 5 power, but this is more than enough for you to actually gain power with Refraction Chamber. So that means that you don't have to use the consoles in each facility to give yourself power. You're going to have power. You're going to get refunded power. You may even gain power if you're using something like Seed. And that means you can use Archive Bank's Econ chip. The Econ chip makes it so that every point of power that is in a console, you can transform that power into credits. 50 credits per power. So from the very beginning of the game, you're already gaining a lot of credits that you normally wouldn't have. And this is really useful if you're playing on a higher difficulty setting where, let's say, your credit gain is at 0.5. So you're only going to be getting like 30 to 40 whenever you steal from a guard. You're going to be getting like 50, 60, 70 from the safes, as opposed to like 80 to 100 or even more than that if you're just doing it normally. So very good way to make money, and you're still not really hindering yourself by that much because you're still going to have some good power. And that's basically on-file Prism. Now, Archive Prism. Now, this is the interesting one. This is probably the most unique agent that the game has at the moment. And, well, let's go over why she's so unique. Archive Prism is a full-on utility agent, just like on-file Prism is. Um, Even more so than on-file Prism, I would say. Because your starting items are completely useless in an offensive situation, you can't use these items to fight guards. You just can't. They're not items for that. The Buster Ship is for hacking, and the Hollow Projection Mesh, well, that's the most interesting item in the game, I think. So before I get to that, basically, when you start out the game, the archive versions of the agents you can't get in detention centers. So if you want this version of Prism, you have to start out the game with her. And because she doesn't have any offensive capabilities, you're automatically in a really precarious situation from the very beginning of the game. So I don't recommend Archive Prism for players who are not that familiar with the game. I think it's a lot better if you use Archive Prism once you're more familiar with the game. Preferably if you've played the game on the higher difficulties already and you kind of know your way around already. So, because of this, you might think that she's kind of bad. She can't defend herself, and you only have one neural disruptor on the field. And that's pretty scary. If there's only one neural disruptor on the field and you get swarmed with agents, swarmed with guards, then your agents are kind of not really going to be able to counter attack that. If you get stuck in a room, especially if you're in like a plastic facility and you can't really hack to progress, sometimes you have to knock the hacker guards down. Well, you can't really do that. But the item that Prism has, I think, makes up for that if you can use it correctly. Now, I like to think of Hollow Projection Mesh as an augment. So let's take a look at what this augment does. It creates a disguise when you activate it. Sprinting and attacking disables the effect. The disguise will fail if an enemy observes from one tile away. It uses 2 power when you use it. It consumes 2 power when you use it, and it has an upkeep cost of 2 power at the beginning of every turn if you keep the disguise on. And the third part is what makes it an augment, in my opinion. Special skill required, only Prism can use this item. So you can think of this as an augment that reduces your item capacity by 1. Basically, that's what it is, right? So, because of that, you may want to invest a little bit of strength just to increase your item capacity. Just like some of the agents that have -1 to their AP, agents like Dr. Shu, Archive Sharp, both of these agents have reduced AP. So because of this, you may want to invest some speed to keep them up to pace. With Prism, you may want to invest strength. So, Hollow Projection Mesh. This item is kind of like a cloaking rig. It disguises Prism and makes her look like a guard. So, if the guards see her, they won't react. If you open a door while your disguise is on, the guards won't react. Basically, you're hiding in plain sight. And it's pretty incredible. But even though it's very similar to a cloaking rig, it's not a cloaking rig. You can't use it like a cloaking rig. In a lot of cases, a cloaking rig is not just hiding and running through places. Personally, I don't like using cloaking rigs for that. I like to think of a cloaking rig as an extra life. You can use it as a diversion, and if you get caught, well, you can just cloak and run away. Because AP is so limited, you can't cloak, run through an area blindly, and then stop there. Because you may run into a danger zone, you may run into a guard, you may run into a drone, you may run into a camera. Who knows? You can't use it blindly. That's why, like I said, I use it like an extra life. If the guards already see me, then I cloak and use the AP. The Hollow Projection Mesh doesn't exactly work that way. You can't use it like the cloaking rig. You can't like deliberately get caught, divert the guard's attention away from your other agents or from whatever you want, like the area that you're, like the objective area. You can't divert them away from it and then just disappear. It doesn't work that way. If you cloak while the enemy sees you, then they just shoot you because it'd be kind of weird. right? So the only way to use hollow projection mesh to as a diversion or an extra life is if you hang around areas of cover. If you undisguise, if you drop the disguise, let them see you, and then walk into cover, and then use the disguise again, then you can get away from them quite easily. They'll investigate the area that you were in instead of the area that you walked away to. So because of that, that's the way you use it as a diversion. But it doesn't work quite the same way as a cloaking rig, unfortunately. Now, this is a problem because there is a contradiction in the way you use this item. In most cases, you don't want to lock yourself around corners. You don't want to be in a really tight zone because sometimes the guards will walk through that zone. And like the item says, if they're one cell away from you and they can see you, whether it's in their peripheral or just directly in front of you, then it causes a problem because your disguise disappears. And well, if your disguise disappears and they see you and you're right next to them because you're generally hiding in plain sight, then you're probably going to die. So yes, the item gives you like a diversion tactic if you're near cover, but in general, you don't want to be near cover. You want to be near walls, away from the inner portions or like tight corridors. You want to be in a very open area to use this. Otherwise, it's quite terrible. This item is quite terrible if you're stuck in a tight corridor. For example, let's say in detention center missions, a lot of the time, right before the detention center, there's a very small room before you enter the area that's holding either a prisoner or one of your agents. If you go in there with a disguise, chances are you're going to get caught. The disguise won't really do anything, and unless you can slip through while the guards are on patrol, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually make use of this disguise function that way. So that's just one of the examples that disguise doesn't really work in. Disguise works well in open areas while you're walking around and scouting. It's primarily used as a scouting tool because you can hide in plain sight. Like I mentioned earlier, let's say you want to scout a room. On the higher difficulties, in most cases you want to do peek, open the door, and then peek again. And this is because on the higher difficulties, the plus difficulties, you don't see danger zones unless you see the source of whatever created that danger zone. So it could be the camera in the corner, it could be a stationary guard, it could be a guard randomly patrolling. If you don't see the camera or the guard, then you don't see any red on the ground. You don't see the danger zones. And if you can open a door without having them be alert, that's a very positive thing. Because if you do peek, open, peek, then you might alert a guard on the other side that you don't know is actually there. That's outside of your initial peek vision. It's a very regular occurrence in the plus difficulties if you played enough. So with disguise, you can bypass that. Now, of course, the downside is it costs 2 power. So it's not really efficient to spend 2 power, go to a door, peek, open, peek, and then just drop your disguise. It's not really efficient. So in terms of efficiency, you need to really have good power generation and good power management. In some cases, this means that you're not going to be able to progress on your mission as fast as you want to if you want to use disguise. And if you want to progress normally, then you have an agent with basically no augment and no items but a buster chip because you're restricted from using the hollow projection mesh. And because of that, yeah, I guess Prism can be pretty terrible. Archive Prism can be pretty terrible if you don't have a steady source of power and if you don't actually use her item. Like I mentioned with Unfile Prism, you're always going to use Refraction Chamber, no matter what. It's always going to be used. This is a very good example, actually, of an item slash augment or something of a similar function that is conditionally used. Because the upkeep cost is so costly, because the activation cost is costly, you're going to find yourself in situations where you can't use it, or you have to make a decision between I want to hack something or I want to actually disguise and keep myself safe. Now, when I was testing Archive Prism, I primarily used Dynamo, And because I have a kind of slow play style, because I always want to try and steal from as many guards as possible, I want to break into every single safe on the mission. I want to explore the entire mission. I want to take a look at the nanofab or the server terminal. I want to do everything on the mission. And in most cases, I'm going to reach security level 6. And I'm okay with using Dynamo. So if that's your play style, if you like playing it slow, if you're okay with not having any power generation for 10 turns if you're playing stealth, then this is not bad. Dynamo, after security level 2, makes it so that you can upkeep Hollow Projection Mesh permanently, because it gives you 2 power per turn. You pay 2 power, and then the next turn you get 2 power. It's just going to use that 2 power that you got to feed Hollow Projection Mesh and keep it on. So Dynamo is a viable program to use if you want to use Prism. Mercenary actually has pretty good synergy with Dynamo as well, because the power cost goes up after you break firewalls. You're going to be able to use this once or twice and then slowly progress. In most cases, you probably won't use them more than once or twice per security level. And because the cost resets every security level, then you can save yourself a lot of power by doing this. Faust is also another option, but Faust is very dangerous and can be a huge detriment to you. Because of the daemon, the daemons can really wreck you. They can really screw up your mission completely if you get some really terrible daemon. A lot of the daemons in the game, they're pretty scary. And in general, you don't want to get daemons. So I would avoid using Faust, even if you're using someone like Central, who gives you power. There is some synergy here. There is some synergy with Antiviral Proxy, Faust, and Hollow Projection Mesh, because whenever you get a daemon, you get 5 power. You're getting 2 power per turn anyway, and you're getting the power to generate the power to sustain Hollow Projection Mesh. But is it really worth it? It's kind of overkill. The amount of power you get is kind of overkill, and with Faust, the risk is too high, and it's generally not that big of a deal. It's not really worth doing. So basically, that's Archive Prism. She's a very high risk, high reward agent. She's able to hide in plain sight, and I guess I could add on one more thing, and it's that once you reach the point where you can actually level up her speed a lot, and you can start using cloaking rigs. Cloaking rigs in tandem with Hollow Projection Mesh is incredibly good. It's really scary. You can basically breeze through the mission for free. You get extra lives with your Hollow Projection Mesh, you get extra lives with your cloaking rig, and in general, there's no stopping her. And of course, as the game goes on, once you can enter nanofabs, once you buy some items, she actually will have an offensive weapon. She will have a neural disruptor, she can have shock traps, whatever you want on her, she can have as you progress. So of course this means that she's not an early game agent, not really an early game agent. The Anarchy helps her. She's more of a mid to late game agent when you actually have items to synergize well with her augment / item, whatever you want to call it, and just in general how agents work in this game. Once you get items, you're generally a lot better. So basically that's it. That's it for Prism. That's the on-file version, and that's the archive version of Prism. Both of them pretty interesting, but I think that the archive version is extremely interesting. Probably the most interesting agent in the game for the next while. Until we get new agents, I think Klei teased at 2 pretty unique agents, and until we get those, I guess Prism will be one of the most, if not the most interesting agent in the game. So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Agent Overview. Goodbye.